The original perfect kill was thwarted when the target was obstructed. What Mike didn't expect was that his actions had been discovered by someone else. The other party left a note on Mike's car, warning him not to kill Hector. Exposed, Mike quickly drove away from the scene, stopping only after he had gone a considerable distance and confirmed it was safe. Mike concluded that his car had been bugged with a tracker, so he got out and meticulously searched, but he couldn't find anything after a long search. It seemed the device was very well hidden. Mike then went to a self-service auto repair shop, lifted the car, and continued his inspection, determined not to miss any suspicious spot. However, even after thoroughly checking the entire undercarriage, he still couldn't find the tracker. He lowered the car and prepared for a more exhaustive search, not even sparing the fuel cap. Despite his comprehensive efforts, he still couldn't locate the tracker, but Mike knew he had to find the tracker to identify the mysterious person tailing him. He decisively removed all the interior panels of the car to inspect every inch, but what made Mike feel utterly desperate was that even by the time the self-service auto repair shop owner announced it was closing time, he still hadn't found anything. To avoid being tracked any further, Mike decided to give the car to the shop owner. However, just as he was about to leave, he noticed the fuel caps sold in the shop, and he realized the tracker might be hidden there. Mike retrieved the discarded fuel cap, opened it, and sure enough, a tiny tracking device was inside. Mike took a taxi back to his place and removed the fuel cap of his own car. Upon opening it, he confirmed this car was also being tracked. He noted the model number of the tracker and then replaced it in the fuel cap. Mike planned to turn the tables and screwed the cap back on. His counter-tracking plan was just beginning when Mike started his night shift. He opened all the gate valves and removed the fuel cap, placing it near the guard booth to make it look like he hadn't left work. In the dead of night, Mike secretly met up with Caldera and gave him the model number of the tracker, asking him to get an identical one. With enough money, there's nothing Caldera can't do, and he quickly got Mike an identical tracker. After reading the manual, Mike discovered that the tracker would lose its signal once the battery was drained, so he removed the other party's tracker, installed his own, and screwed the fuel cap back on. Mike took out his frequently used radio to quickly drain the battery of the other tracker. As soon as the other party realized that the tracker's battery was too low, they would definitely come over and take it away to replace the battery. When the battery was almost drained, Mike removed it completely to kill the signal. Now, all Mike had to do was wait for the other party to take the bait. Mike waited nearly all night, and sure enough, someone came to retrieve the tracker from the fuel cap. Mike then grabbed his gun and began tailing their vehicle. Observing from the shadows, Mike saw the tracker handed off to another person. Mike also shifted the tracking target. Soon he came to a bridge and realized that he lost the car, but the signal showed that it was at this location. It turned out the other party had parked the car under the bridge. The man waited until no one was around, then retrieved a bag of money from beneath a manhole cover. It seems like this is the money for their deal. He continued this process at various locations, collecting bags of money until dawn, ultimately gathering a sizable haul. What Mike didn't know was that this would become his future job. Fans of Breaking Bad will recall how Mike once took Jesse to the countryside to collect money. Mike saw the man enter a store but leave shortly after. As the target moved away, Mike quickly turned around and followed. The camera panned to the sign of Los Palos Hermanos, hinting at Gus's upcoming appearance. In the last episode, Chuck pretended to resign and recorded Jimmy's crime of altering bank documents. Chuck then invited Howard over to prove he was framed by Jimmy. However, Howard disagreed with Chuck's approach. He believed Chuck should have informed him of the plan beforehand, as Chuck's sudden resignation had startled him. Howard argued that the tape alone was not enough to indict Jimmy, and Mesa Verde Bank's case would no longer be entrusted to HHM. In Howard's view, Chuck's actions were unnecessary, but it seemed Chuck had another plan in mind. When assistant Ernesto arrived, Chuck deliberately asked him to change the batteries in the recorder. As soon as the batteries were in, Jimmy's recording played out.
12:16. It was me.
Turn that off! Turn it off!
It all went
Turn it off!
exactly.
You did not hear that!
Chuck sternly warned Ernesto not to disclose this matter, or his career would be affected. After Ernesto left, Chuck showed a triumphant expression. It seemed Jimmy wouldn't be able to avoid falling into Chuck's trap again. He is the most charismatic villain in Breaking Bad. Even in death, he maintains a gentlemanly demeanor. Typically, when a villain dies, the audience feels a sense of satisfaction. However, Gus's death left many viewers feeling regretful, especially Mike, who was furious upon learning of Gus's death and vowed to settle the score with Walter. This shows how loyal Mike was to Gus. But how does Mike, who has always been a loner, Follow Gus? Better Call Saul provides detailed backstory. To find out who was tracking him, Mike discovered that the target had entered a fried chicken restaurant. In order not to blow his cover, Mike asks Jimmy to be his eyes and ears at Los Palos Hermanos. Jimmy ordered a meal and pretended to eat there. Soon, the target, carrying a bag, entered the restaurant. To get closer to Victor, Jimmy repeatedly changed his position. At this time, Gus made his entrance just as he did in Breaking Bad, appearing as a janitor cleaning the restaurant. This showcases Gus's low profile and caution, which is a key reason for his dominance. Jimmy stared intently at Victor, which did not go unnoticed by Gus, who was pretending to sweep nearby. After Gus walked past Victor, Victor turned and prepared to leave, throwing some trash into the bin on his way out. Jimmy's unwavering gaze on Victor made him appear somewhat unprofessional as a private investigator. Victor left after the dedication of Jimmy also came to the bin to look for just Victor threw away things trying to help Mike find useful clues. But before Jimmy could find anything, Gus caught him.
Can I help you?
Quick-witted, Jimmy quickly removed his watch and tossed it into the trash, then claimed he was looking for his lost watch. At this moment, Gus appears very approachable, giving no indication that he's actually a ruthless person. He even helped Jimmy find his lost watch. Jimmy then reported what he had seen to Mike, who was waiting outside. Mike was somewhat surprised to learn that Victor had gone in just to have breakfast. Jimmy wanted to continue helping Mike, but Mike dismissed him. As he left, Jimmy didn't forget to pitch his services again.
Who's got your back, huh? Me, that's who. I'll keep that in mind.
As Jimmy was leaving, Gus followed him outside. From Gus's serious expression, it was clear he had realized Mike was looking for him, so Gus decided to take the initiative. He instructed his subordinate, Victor, to carry the tracker to deliberately mislead Mike. Mike followed the signal all the way to a desolate area. The tracker was just ahead, but there were no vehicles in sight. Using binoculars, Mike realized he had been tricked. The tracker was placed on top of a cell phone.
Yeah.
May I assume that you are armed?
Yes.
I do not wish to see your gun. And if I don't, I promise you won't see mine. Are we in agreement?
We are.
Expect 2 cars momentarily.
And that's how Gus had his first meeting with Mike in relative safety. Mike pulled out the note he found when he tried to assassinate Hector and demanded to know why Gus was tracking him. Gus, without beating around the bush, explained that Hector's death would not benefit him at the moment. He is well aware of the conflict between Mike and Hector, including Mike's robbery of Hector's money and Hector's murder of an innocent witness. All of this was under Gus's surveillance. Gus stated that Mike could continue robbing Hector's trucks but could not kill Hector. In return, Gus would stop tracking Mike. Just as Gus was about to leave, Mike called out to him. From Gus's permission to rob Hector's cargo, Mike realized they were competitors. Given that he still had unfinished business with Hector, the enemy of his enemy was his friend. This marked the first collaboration between Mike and Gus. Meanwhile, Ernesto, knowing Chuck had evidence against Jimmy, was too scared to tell Jimmy directly and instead informed Kim first. Upon hearing the news, Kim immediately called Jimmy over and had him pay her $1 to establish attorney-client privilege. Realizing that Chuck had secretly recorded their conversation, Jimmy understood he had fallen into Chuck's trap. Rational Kim knew that a single recording couldn't prove everything, but they needed to figure out Chuck's purpose for making it. After attending to all the clients, Jimmy still felt gloomy. After several hours of consultation and analysis, Kim guessed that Chuck wouldn't show the recording to Mesa Verde's Kevin, and Howard wouldn't agree to Chuck revealing it either, as it would damage the firm's reputation. But Kim couldn't figure out Chuck's real motive for the recording. She advised Jimmy to stay put and patiently wait for Chuck to make his move. After Kim left, Jimmy, following his brother's method of removing tape, grew angrier the more he thought about it. Just a few days earlier, he had confessed to his brother about altering the bank documents, thinking it would make Chuck forgive him. He even helped Chuck remove the space blanket from the wall. Chuck, seeing Jimmy's rough removal method that could damage the furniture's finish, taught him the proper way. Jimmy also noticed that Chuck still kept the books he loved as a child, and they reminisced about happy memories from the past. In that moment, Jimmy felt like he had his brother's approval. What he couldn't accept was that Chuck had gone to such great lengths to deceive him, and had even recorded it. In a fit of anger, Jimmy tore off the tape, ready to confront Chuck. Meanwhile, Howard also secretly visited Chuck's house because Chuck had hired a private investigator for 8 days, waiting for Jimmy to take the bait, a costly expense that Howard doesn't see the need to incur. Chuck, hypocritically cloaking his personal vendetta as legal strategy, defended his actions. Howard suggested that Chuck broaden his perspective and take a step back for the bigger picture. After all, Howard was the majority shareholder of HHM, so Chuck compromised. Chuck said he would hire the private investigator only at night because he was convinced Jimmy would sneak in to steal the tape then. This shows that Jimmy's image in Chuck's mind is so bad. Hearing this, Howard is very helpless, and he asks Chuck why he is so sure. Chuck's answer was still that he knew his brother well. However, the reality proved him wrong quickly. Instead of sneaking in at night, Jimmy came straight to confront Chuck in broad daylight.
Jimmy!
You take me?
Jimmy!
You pulled that heartstrings con job on me? Oh, my brain used to work. I'm sick. I don't know what to do. No wonder Rebecca left you. What took her so long? There it is!
In his furious state, Jimmy didn't realize that Chuck had hidden 2 witnesses in the house. Once again, he fell into Chuck's carefully laid trap.
Happy now for what? For nothing! Is that all there is, Chuck? That's all there is? How'd you make copies, huh, Chuck? Huh? You tell me or I'll burn this house to the ground!
Jimmy! That's enough! You need to step away.
Howard, you were a witness to what happened here?
I was.
To get his own brother imprisoned, Chuck first pretended to be pitiful to gain his brother's sympathy. He guessed his brother would confess to some crimes, so he secretly recorded their conversation, then intentionally leaked the recording. When Jimmy found out he had been tricked, he burst in furiously, falling right into Chuck's trap again. After finding the tape, Jimmy destroyed it right in front of Chuck, unaware that this was all part of Chuck's plan, and as a witness to the private detective has been waiting for a long time. By the time Jimmy realized what was happening, it was too late. His emotions were just a weak point for Chuck to exploit. Jimmy called his new assistant to cancel his appointments for the next few days, then quietly sat by the roadside, waiting for the police. Hypocritical Chuck even invited Jimmy inside to wait and made excuses for his disgraceful actions. Although Chuck claimed he was doing it for Jimmy's own good, he was always considering his own perspective.
But Jimmy, this is an opportunity. That's why I'm doing this, not to punish you. To show you, truly show you that you have to make a change before it's too late. Before you destroy yourself or someone else. And I believe you can change. You'll find your path. And when you're ready, I will be there to help you walk that path.
Just like Walter in Breaking Bad, he claims to be doing it for the good of his family, but in the end, he realizes how much disaster his actions have caused them. This sharply satirizes many people in real life. If you truly care for someone, you should consider their needs from their perspective, rather than trying to shape them into what you want them to be. What Jimmy really wanted was his brother's recognition and help, which is not too much to ask. But Chuck never accepted Jimmy, instead always focusing on his flaws. If Chuck really wants what's best for Jimmy, then accept him and support him, and then restrain Jimmy's behavior as a big brother. Then they'll surely become good brothers in Jimmy's heart who reigns supreme in the legal world. However, with that one misguided thought, Chuck sent Jimmy to prison for reform. This doomed them both to mutual destruction. At the police station, Jimmy encountered the sneering prosecutor Bill. Seeing Jimmy in such a state, Bill seemed to regain his sense of superiority. The next day in court, the judge was surprised to see lawyer Jimmy appearing in this manner. Based on Jimmy's multiple offenses, he faced up to 2.5 years in prison and a $6,000 fine. The judge reminded Jimmy he could plead not guilty and asked if he had a defense attorney. Kim, having heard the news, arrived just in time as Jimmy's lawyer, but Jimmy expressed his desire to represent himself. Although the judge did not recommend self-representation, she respected the defendant's wishes. Reluctantly, Kim was asked to leave by the judge because Jimmy recently started working in elder law. The judge considered his work an indispensable part of the legal field. Weighing this, she set his bail at $2,500. After returning, Jimmy explained everything to Kim, recounting the events of the previous day in detail. He admitted that he had fallen into Chuck's trap, Jimmy knew Kim was already overwhelmed with the Mesa Verde case and didn't want her to be affected by his mess. He'll take care of this himself. Meanwhile, on his first collaboration with Gus, Mike arrived at a clinic near the Mexican border. This clinic, funded by Gus, provided free medical care to civilians. Dr. Barry, of course, followed Gus's orders. In Breaking Bad, after Gus's revenge in Mexico left him severely poisoned, it was this doctor who provided emergency care, saving both the poisoned Gus and the gunshot-wounded Mike. Gus arranged for Barry to give Mike a bag of contraband. Mike then began sabotaging Hector's transport routes. He drove to a key location along Hector's transportation route, took out a new pair of shoes, and filled them with the contraband he got from Barry. After several attempts, Mike managed to hang the shoes securely on a power line. When Hector's truck passed by, Mike was already waiting in a concealed spot. Since they are checked every time they cross the border, they stop to hide the guns they are carrying every time they get to this location. Mike fired a shot into the air. Hearing the gunshots, the two men quickly hit the ground. Mike fired several more shots, making them think it was just hunters, so they relaxed their guard. They hid their guns and prepared to leave. As their truck passed under the shoes, Mike fired another shot, hitting the shoes and scattering the contraband onto the truck. When they reached the border checkpoint, they were unaware of the trouble looming. The sniffer dog detected the contraband, sat down, and the two men were arrested on the spot. As a result, Hector's ice cream shop was also shut down. Seeing Hector's business disrupted, Mike felt a sense of relief. Meanwhile, due to Chuck's health issues, District Attorney Kyra had to visit Chuck at home to discuss the case against Jimmy. The prosecutor assumed Jimmy had assaulted Chuck. Chuck admitted that although Jimmy had many flaws, he had a moral baseline and wouldn't physically harm his brother. The prosecutor worried Chuck might not testify against Jimmy in court, but Chuck assured her he would. Kyra stated that Jimmy wouldn't receive leniency just because he was a lawyer. Chuck agreed with Kyra's stance. However, Chuck was conflicted. As Jimmy was still his brother, he wondered if there was a better solution. That evening, Jimmy went to the office and, rarely smoking, lit an expired cigarette. He only smoked when deeply troubled. Kim noticed that Jimmy was preoccupied. She learned that Jimmy had received a plea deal from Kyra. The plea deal was in the form of a pretrial diversion, which surprised Jimmy. Pretrial diversion meant admitting guilt without prosecution or a criminal record. Kim thought this was a good outcome for Jimmy and that it would drive Chuck mad. But Jimmy revealed it was Chuck's idea. This was the compromise Chuck had proposed to Kyra. However, before accepting this deal, they needed to submit the felony confession to the Bar Association, meaning Jimmy would lose his law license. Jimmy realized that Chuck didn't want him in jail but wanted him disbarred. Jimmy had considered this possibility before breaking into his brother's house, but he hadn't anticipated the consequences to be so severe. Moreover, Chuck was very familiar with the people at the Bar Association, leaving Jimmy in an isolated and helpless state. Kim couldn't stand by and watch Jimmy fight alone. She insisted on helping with his defense, calling Jimmy's predicament a sunk cost. Jimmy accepted Kim's help and decided to turn the tables, vowing to give Chuck a taste of his own medicine.